Welcome to the Car Guys, and this week we're talking again about Ferrari, and more specifically a detailed look at Ferrari's launch history and whether or not it is launching and replacing its cars more quickly than at any point in its history. As a Ferrari owner, I certainly feel this way, and hundreds of you have contacted me to say you feel the same. Is Ferrari making too many cars? Are they arriving more quickly than ever before? Let's find out. 10 months ago, I made a video about the new SF90 Spider and how the timing of the new models and the effect they would have on the residuals of loyal Ferrari customers. This followed on from the real-world impact that the 812 GTS had on the 812 Superfast, which in many cases had lost £100,000 to £150,000 worth of its value in less than a year. And all because the GTS was the newer, sexier model and it arrived hot on the heels of the Superfast. Well, this week, based on your comments, I thought I would do a deep dive on Ferrari and have a detailed look at its strategy for new models and worldwide growth, its launch history and timings, and the effect this is having on the market. The big question is Ferrari increasing the frequency of its launches? Is it making too many cars? And is the specialness of its cars diminishing through rapid development and replacement? Now, I should point out that prior to making this episode, I had no statistical proof whatsoever that Ferrari was launching cars more quickly. It was just a feeling that I had and that many of you had. It may have been completely unfounded, but that's why I thought it was important to have a look and find out the truth. Now, first of all, you have to remember that Ferrari is now part publicly owned, which means it has a responsibility to its shareholders and it has to report its results. The downside, of course, of this is that it must continually show development, improvement, and increased profits. The classic share price merry-go-round. Since becoming a public company, its annual cars built has increased from 8,014 to 10,131 in 2019. And most recently, the global pandemic has dropped production back to 9,119 cars in 2020. But you can expect that to rise pretty quickly. This growth is due to an increased number of vehicles on offer, but also increasing demand from emerging markets. So China, for example, is up 17%, Europe is up 14%, but strangely, the USA demand is actually down. So yes, annually Ferrari is making more cars, and of course once the 4x4 Purosangue comes online, you can expect those numbers to increase significantly, as it did when Porsche and Rolls-Royce and Lamborghini introduced their SUV models. And also I'd like to thank our Italian viewers for pointing out how to say Purosangue correctly. Grazie. If you watch my Future of Ferrari episode, you will know that Ferrari splits its road cars into 4 categories: Sport, Gran Turismo, Special Series, and Icona. The Sport category includes the SF90, the SF90 Spider, F8 Tributo, F8 Spider, 812 Superfast, 812 GTS, and the new 296 GTB. The Gran Turismo category gives you the Roma and the Portofino M. The Special Series gives you the 488 Pista Spider, 812 Competizione, and 812 Competizione Aperta, and the Icona has of course the Monza SP1 and Monza SP2. Here are the official split of sales for these 4 categories. As you can see, the Sport and Special Series category has increased over the past 3 years, mainly due to increased models added. The number of GT cars has actually reduced, but bear in mind this reflects the ending of the production of the GTC4 Lusso and Lusso T, and it doesn't yet include the full launch effect of the Roma. So let's take a look back over the last 15 years and really see if Ferrari is increasing the pace of its launches for its road cars, or does it just feel that way? Here we can see the Sport range, which is of course the V8 mid-engined and V12 front-engine models. The 430 started deliveries back in 2005 and was replaced just 4 years later with the 458 Italia. But what's interesting is that the 488 GTB and Spider both came in 2015, 6 years after the 458. Roll on to the F8 Tributo, which appeared 4 years after the 488 GTB and sparked fears that Ferrari was ramping up and speeding up the replacement of its models. In fact, it was actually the 458 which bucked the trend for the usual 4 to 5 year lifespan for the V8 models, and it also points to 2023 as being the time for the replacement of the F8 Tributo, if in fact there is a replacement, because of course the V8s will most likely be ending and the 296 GTB will take its place fully. However, if you do assume that the 296 GTB is actually the replacement for the F8 Tributo, then we're really in trouble, because it only appeared 2 years after the F8 was launched. The timing of the Spider models is also crucial in giving the impression that Ferrari is making cars too quickly. Both Coupe and Spider of the 430 arrived in the same year, but the 458 Spider arrived 2 years later than the 458 Coupe in 2011. By the time we got to the 488 generation, the GTB and Spider arrived in the same year, and it was the same story for the F8 and F8 Spider. So the later deliveries of the 458 Spider split the production time of the 458 and made it appear that the 488 arrived hot on the heels of that car. In fact, the 488 arrived 4 years after the 458 Spider and 6 years after the Coupe. The V12 sports cars are more straightforward. The 599 arrived in 2006, the F12 came in 2012, the 812 a year prematurely in 2017, and the GTS arrived back on the 6-year frequency in 2018. By contrast though, the Gran Turismo range has a positively glacial development program. We saw the popular California start deliveries back in 2008, and its replacement, the Portofino, arrived in 2018. 10 years later. Okay, so we had a couple of attempts to jazz up the California with the 30 and the T, but that's still a long time compared to the V8 mid-engine cars. And it's the same for the 4-seaters, with 2005's 612 Scaglietti replaced 6 years later in 2011 by the FF, and the GTC4 Lusso taking over in 2016, 5 years after. The Purosangue is not expected until late 2022, taking the gap back up to 6 years. And for completeness, let's have a quick look at the special hot series of cars. Deliveries of the 430 Scuderia started in 2007, 2 years after the standard car. For the 458 generation, the Speciale was 2013, 4 years after the Italia, and the Pista was 2018, 3 years after the 488. So again, nothing really to see here. And how about Ferrari's hypercars? The F40 was 1987, the F50 arrived 8 years later in 1995, Enzo production started in 2003, 8 years after the F50, and its successor, the LaFerrari, arrived in 2014, an 11-year gap. So theoretically, we shouldn't see something until 2024 or 2025, but I bet we see something a lot sooner than that. So the big question, is Ferrari speeding up the development and pace of its launches? Well, actually, as we've just seen, no, not so much. A year here or there, but then the gap is clawed back on the next generation. So it's actually the popularity and success of the 458 that meant its times were extended, and therefore it felt like everything was being compressed either side. So why do we feel right now that there's a new Ferrari every few months? Well, it's what we talked about at the very start of this episode. Ferrari is actually adding more models and new market segments than ever before. In this current generation alone, we have 4 entirely new models: the SF90, the Monza, the Roma, and the 296 GTB. And that's in addition to the core range. As of today, there are 7 core cars in Ferrari's range, but 13 variations, including Spiders. And to give you some perspective, in 2014, there were 7 cars total. At no point in history has Ferrari had this many cars in the range. And we've got another new model, the Purosangue, coming next year. So actually, that's what's mainly driving the production numbers north of 10,000, and it'll get a lot higher in the next 5 years. And of course, when I say much higher, we are still talking about only 15,000 cars, which is a tiny fraction of the number that, say, Porsche make. It is, of course, expanding to fulfill worldwide demand and consumer choice, and that is a good thing. The downside, though, is a loss of exclusivity. But before we get all doom and gloom about it, we must remember that 15,000 cars for the most iconic and historic and successful supercar brand in the world is still small potatoes. Our friends Porsche here are still revered and loved by petrol heads all over the world, and yet there are 21 versions of the 911 on sale today. 21. Add in the Cayman and the Boxster and it's 32 models. And with those models combined, Porsche sells, wait for it, 56,000 cars a year, compared to Ferrari's current just under 10,000. This week we've shown conclusively then that the pace of launches of Ferrari's core models is not increasing alarmingly, but that the range and the amount of choice most certainly is. And as a consequence, in 2018, before the pandemic, Ferrari's profits were at an all-time high. A strong Ferrari means more R&D, more confidence, and a more exciting range of cars for all of us. And that, I'm sure you will agree, is a good thing. Thank you very much for watching this episode on Ferrari's pace of development and number of cars built. If you like what I'm doing on The Car Guys, please subscribe, leave comments and likes. There'll be another episode along next week.